Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming this evening. Tonight, we welcome Nuria Lombardero and Francisco González de Canales for New Formalism, a presentation on their recent work and their practice and their intermediate unit here at the AA, which they have been teaching for the past 8 years. This brings me to introduce myself. My name is Shireen Dumar. I'm a current fourth-year student at the AA, and Nuria and Francisco were my tutors in 2014-2015 when I was a second-year student. So just to give you a little bit of background, Nuria and Francisco run an architecture and urbanism practice that is based in Seville and here in London, and it's been running since 2003. Their work is very much context-based and focused on materiality and construction detail. They're interested in form as a precondition to both program and context, which enables them to scrutinize and question the mundane realities of construction, typological and compositional arrangements, and limits between the technological and artisanal. And because for them, form is not only understood as an architectural intelligible, but as a mean of regulation. Most of their work is based in Andalusia, but they've recently expanded internationally to Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. They have also developed substantial academic work in the field of history and theory of architecture of the city. And last year, they published a book, Rafael Moneo, Building, Teaching, Writing, among many other publications. As for their work at the AA, they founded an initiative called Politics of Fabrication, where they explore their academic interest. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Nuria and Francisco.
Thank you very much, Shireen, for your very nice words and your kind presentation. We are very pleased to be here at AA, which we consider our home, with this audience that we really feel is part of our kind of internal life. We want to talk about our practice. That is not normally what we do here at AA. And we entitle the lecture with New Formalism because in a way it is something that was in the back of our minds for the last decade. It's coming back to a period in which we were at Harvard University. And I remember going to a lecture by Roberto Mangabeira Ungers. I don't know if you heard about him. He's a great political theorist, and he did a lecture once at Harvard talking about formalism in legal theory, and his classification involved 7 different categories, and we were very surprised because we said, how it is possible that he's able to talk about formalism according to 7 categories, and we architects, that we are always working with form and so on, we are not able to explain the way in which we work with such a sophistication, no? And many times when we talk about formalism, especially to former generations, is happening through a certain disdain, no? Like, oh, you're a formalist. So we thought that the discussion of formalism was a pending issue for architects, I mean, back in 2006 and still in a way today. So we would like to address this issue of formalism through 4 different considerations related to that concept. The first of it is that for us, when we talk about formalism and form, we're talking about spatial organization. This means that it has to do with how elements are displayed in a space, how they're able to generate different sequences, they are able to arrange different spaces, and all this said in a very geometrical and very abstract way. Because we believe that this is becoming more interesting when it's also becoming typological, in the sense that a typology is and a spatial organization that becomes a system of relations in which certain structures, the social and cultural structures, are involved. We believe that form in that way is not predicting or prescribing how relations are going to happen, but it's more or less a reference for the articulation of how relations in cultural, public, social life is going to happen. We believe that form is able to discriminate how an environment is going to be, how you can have all these different conditions, how these different spaces that you see. This is a map of Seville, so all these courtyards that are related to this idea that form is able to preserve an environment for living, but at the same time, form is able to question how the perimeter of that space for living is. How is the threshold? How is the communication from one space to the other? We believe that form, as being a system of relations, is not in conflict with expression, with the communication of it. Expression that is to be found in the vernacular and rural architecture, that is so many times the context where we develop our practice, but it's also to be found in certain modernist traditions, where form as a system of relations and form as an expression are coming together. So the typological arrangement and the expression are not at odds, but to the contrary. What I believe is, and Nuria with me here, is that in a way, the form as an expression is able to communicate better to the people how this system of relations works without having to use ornament or any of the traditional elements of architecture. So it is form as expression communicating the system of relations. And finally, we think that it's very important to believe that form is not an idea. Form is a construction, and it's becoming a construction that has a stable, durable presence in society, which means that there are certain limits related to the way in which you materialize your work. So material becomes very relevant. If it's brick, which is the potential of it, which is the constraints of it, or is concrete in the way that you can manipulate in a very thin shell, in the way that we use in some of our projects. So material is light, that we use to work also with it in many times. And that's why we are so interested in the work of people like Oteiza, where form as an expression, form as a material, form as an articulation of relations is coming together through the folding of the material, through the carving of the material in the case of people like Chillida, through the casting of the material. And this has become a typical exercise in the unit, for many years, in which material, form, expression, articulation of relations are happening in a very intuitive way, and it became like the preliminary exercise to introduce students to our concept of form. However, today we are not going to talk about the unit, we are going to talk about our practice. And we have selected 10 different pieces from our practice. Some of them, the first section related to buildings open to the public, and the second more related to the public realm. The first building that I'm going to present, and then Nuria is going to continue after me, is a medical center in Huelva. As Shireen said before, most of our projects are in the south of Spain, in Andalusia. It's a very interesting place because, as you see here, this is the context, and it's very difficult to see that there is any village or any urban fabric at all. So it's the forest. Only if you get a bit closer, you will see that in between these woods, these trees, you can find a small village where this project is going to be situated. This is one of 7 villages that are the ones that are going to be served by this medical center. Here you have a vision of how it is the main village, El Monaster, that is embedded into the woods. And these trees that you're seeing here are very beautiful. These ones are the holm oaks, the ones that are very important in the breeding of the Iberian pig. That is the one from which we get the cured ham in Spain. So all these pigs are eating the fruits of this tree. The project was extremely small. I mean, the problem was that the municipality didn't have a terrain for us, so we looked for all these leftovers and finally found a place in between the road and the sport courts behind where we can situate the building. So as you see here, the building is going to be conditioned by this very narrow strip in between a road and a sports court that you see in there. Here you see how there is a process of negotiation, and Form is able to create this negotiation between the road, the sports court, and several trees that are existing, these home trees that I said before. The interior is very predicted by the regulations of the regional government. Even if you look at this kind of cladding in green, is mandatory, 1.5 meters with the color of the Andalusian flag, because it's the one of the administration. And here you see the program that is really small. The 2 big rooms are, I don't know if I have a pointer here. We don't have a pointer. Joel, do we have a pointer? No. Okay, for the next one. So you see that there are 2 larger rooms. You know? So the 2 larger rooms are the doctor's offices, and the others are the toilets and the utilities for this very small medical center. Is built with structural brick walls of 1 foot, and then a very simple slab of 1 directional concrete. Also, we wanted to keep this idea of privacy, the way in which you were able to be inside of the doctor's office without being seen, so the windows are very high. And at the same time, being inside of this place, you were able to see the landscape. But probably the most important feature of this design is how it is able to generate a kind of relationship with this very extreme context, you know, the context of having to incorporate the trees that are not only, you know, trees that are in front of the building, but they are used as a screen filtering the light into the building, like something that is relevant in the south of Spain where the sun is very strong. The tree is signaling the entrance for the doctors in the I don't know if this is work. Yes. I like this. But also different relationships. It's not only the tree, it is the sports court, how we needed to have it like a blank wall. No? We like a lot this kind of blank walls with no windows, no openings. In this case, it was very clear. I mean, there's going to be people playing football here, so they are going to hit the wall with the ball. So we imagine that this could be like a polka dot design naturally by the people, very from the south of Spain. And we decided to have it totally blank. Very different from what is happening with the road. The building is slightly bent in order to allow cars to park here for a certain time, but showing very clearly that this is a pedestrian space. So it was weird, no? In the middle of the road to have a pavement, to have a sidewalk. So we decided to extend the asphalt So you see the asphalt of the road is coming to the door gate, and then to use the language of the road in order to show that this was pedestrian. Oops, sorry. You see another view of this pedestrian cross. It's a building that worked very well. It was awarded in Spain, and it was very well appropriated by the people. And actually, this is a more recent picture, and the elder people of the village, they reckon that it's like a public room for them to stay. They are looking in the shadow, during the winter, and then it is in the sun during, the opposite, the sun during the winter, and it's in the shadow during the summer.
Okay, so following this section of public buildings, we are showing here a proposal we did for office headquarters in Seville. So the building was located in one of the main arteries and the most elegant one in the city, that is the Palm Avenue, where the residents constructed the most amazing villas during the years of the Ibero-American exhibition in 1929. So actually the proposal was an extension of an existing building, that it was the residence of the director of one of the most important newspapers in Spain, and it was constructed by a very important and one of the most important architects in Seville in the regionalism style. There is Aníbal González, who also maybe you recognize in this picture. He constructed one of the main monuments in Seville, that is the Plaza de España, that appears in Star Wars, and also maybe if you saw it in the Game of Thrones. So it was very important building in Seville that we have to respect. It was a very difficult commission to get. We have a lot of architects competing with us, and how we did achieve that the client was listening to us is that, differently from other proposals that were looking to a very simple box with all the program that they needed for the extension, we were looking for how to play with the limits of the site, with the limits of the regulation, trying to achieve the maximum square meters. So this, at the end, we sorted out, or we solved it with a very minimum ground floor plan, with a small box with the circulation and the services, and the rest open for being the program in the other floors that were hanging from the top. So we have a very stable and rigid ceiling with a set of beams that are taking all the load of the pieces hanging from there, as you can see here in the section. We didn't want to compete with this building because, as we said, it's a very important building in Seville, very important architect, so we wanted to have a very neutral facade with no minimal expression, and it's only the materiality, the copper mesh, that is taking this importance and opening up certain gaps in the facade for allowing views from the interior to the exterior, and keeping the privacy of the building. So sometimes in the building, you can see some of the spaces we were designing. We're having a dialogue with the garden that is very typical of this regionalism architecture in Seville.
So the next building we want to talk about is not one building, it's a set of buildings in a region in Murcia that is very close to Almería and Malaga. Almería and Granada, not Malaga, nothing to do with Malaga, sorry. It's a very kind of arid landscape. As you see here in this picture, and probably you can recognize this area because it's very close to Almería, also from this film, because it's the place where, or very close to the place where Sergio Leone used to do his movies, the spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood in the 70s. And it's a very large lot. It's 50 hectares in that territory, and we are to do 7 different buildings for leisure in that area. Leisure that is very much related to this connecting with the real world. So you are into this, so you don't have actually not only internet connection, but you don't have mobile network. I mean, when we used to go there, we cannot speak with the phone. We needed a satellite, a special mobile to talk from this place. So this is the landscape as it is, very rocky, very arid, very strong. And we were very enticed by these experiments by Robert Smithson in his latest years, where he was working with this arid landscape in a very peculiar way. On the one hand, he was putting these forms that were very regular, rectangular, geometrical. The material was totally alien to the landscape, but at the same time, by being reflective, was incorporating in some way the experience of the landscape. So we use this in order to develop this building that is a hotel that is very rigid, is very rectangular, but is with this metallic shape reflecting the experience of the landscape. The hotel is not sitting on top of the mountain, but is in a way leaving the landscape to go underneath, and there is two different ways of responding to that. All this cascading of terraces looking at the larger vista of the landscape, and this separation that generates all the corridors, all the circulation system that is looking towards the rocky, arid landscape in a closer scale. You see here that is very much a systematic battery of rooms going on. This is the landscape going underneath, passing through the building with this reflective, strange situation. So there is no will to fuse the building with the landscape, but at the same time, the building is reflecting the landscape. And the other building we want to talk about in this same area is more related to gravity and experiments with, again, going back to Robert Smithson, and how gravitational forces are able to reveal something from the context, from the topography. In this case, we're working with a winery, and this winery is reflecting how the process of producing wine is working. So you have three different boxes. Each of them is related to one part of this process, and this process is working actually with gravity. So you come to the first level, bring in your grapes, then you put them into a kind of deposit, and then you bottle the wine in the lower level. And for us, it was very important not to mimic how the landscape is, but to try to shift, dislocate, move these different boxes in a way that the movement of the boxes were revealing the nature of this topography and not, fusing or trying to mimic it. Here you see the different boxes, one on top of the other, the different processes of the production of wine, the section, the plane where you bring the grapes, and a different view from the top. So the building has two entrances. One is for the grapes to come in, and the other is the one we saw from below for the bottles to come out.
Okay, so we enter here to a second section of the presentation that is about the private realm. Here we will show you some projects we did related to domesticity and some typologies of housing. Some of these explorations were coming from our visits to different sites that Francisco summarized in his book, Experiments with Life Itself. You can look to this book in the library, and you can buy it in the bookshop as well. So when he was developing his PhD, we were visiting certain houses of some architects that were inspiring later. We find out when we were thinking about how to do the presentation that sometimes there are connections with these places we visit, or these houses we visit. So the first housing example that I'm going to talk about is a housing block we designed in Malaga. It was not constructed at the end, but for us was a very interesting exercise in terms of typology and context, and also influenced some of the latest projects we did in the office. So this proposal was in Malaga, in the city center of Malaga, in a very degraded area. You see there was a parking there, and there were certain pieces that has to be kept. You see 3-4 pieces there. And there was also an archaeological site in the underground level that we have to take into account in the design. So the idea was look into kind of a Rosian view of the city related to the architecture of the city with Ernesto Nathan Rogers, look into how we can sew these pieces and maintain the configuration of the urban fabric of the old city center. So we took a very neutral snake or piece, very thin piece, that is sewing all these pieces. And this neutrality is achieved by a with a common language. And this common language of this stripe is these U shapes made of concrete that serve as a, yeah.
I can point them because they're too small.
But you see all these pieces, U shapes, that are in the facade and serve as a storage space. And it's as if this storage space, these closets with the clothes of the inhabitants of the house, were creating a layer to keep the warmth of the house. So we were taking an inspiration from Joseph Boy's experiments with felt of how he was using the cloth as a way to keep the warmth of the interior while having certain tactility of this wall. And so this kind of chorizo, let's say, stripe, was folding itself into the side, and it was subdivided or cut depending on the rooms needed, and these rooms were configuring the different types of housing. The stripe is folding itself to create the entrance, as you can see here. So it's folding, taking these pre-existing pieces, and then folding itself to create the entrance to the block, and inside of it creates an entrance to the archaeological site we were mentioning before.
There is another project that is related to this one in Nairobi that we are working on it right now. It's not exactly the same, but still we are working with this typology of the open linear block. The context is very different. If you see here, I don't know if you see in the picture very well, but all this environment is very chaotic. So there is no urban consistency. It's very different to Malaga, no? Where you have the city center, the formation of the blocks are very clear. So here is a scattered architecture across this kind of open field. But we wanted to bring back this idea of the linear block. And in this case, instead of having the U shapes with the closets, we are having an exoskeleton, that is the one that you are seeing here, that is able to keep all the interior of the linear block open for reconfiguration. So the client can manage to have all the different typologies of units inside of this exoskeleton. This is a site plan where you see more or less the strategy. The lot is very weird. It's with a triangular shape. So the building is this linear block mainly on top of a podium. And then this second leg is the facilities and utilities for the residents that are looking to this river and this forest. We thought that it was very important also to make of this building a stable presence in the city, you know, in this very annoying and disarticulated context. No? So the cornice is in a way containing all this exoskeleton as well as the podium that we mentioned before. So we thought that this could be a first step for redeveloping the areas that are next to this building, and they are going to be developed further on with this more stable, more clearly defined system of blocks. Here you see that differently to Malaga, this is a much wider block, so we have rooms looking to one side and the other, while in Malaga was one room after another. So we are working on this right now, and hopefully it will come forward.
Okay, here, when looking to all and selecting the projects we were going to show today, we figured out that we were trying to rediscover or try to redefine what is the suburban house in the south part of Spain. So this house, that it was one of the houses that we published the most, was an example of how we were working in a suburban area. In this case, it's the first suburban area of Cordoba. I don't know if you know Cordoba, the city in the southern part of Spain, and this was the first suburban area outside of the city center, where they constructed, looking at the American dream, suburbia with houses and gardens that are open to people, by architects like Rafael de la Hoz, that is very well-known architect from Cordoba. And what happened is that the site that the clients have was in the middle of this neighborhood, but it was not like that idyllic site that I was talking at the beginning, but mostly is filled with this very kind of tacky, how can I say, tacky Andalusian pop vernacular housing, as you can see here. And the clients were very horrified by this environment, and they wanted to be detached. Maybe some people like it, but they didn't like it at all. So they wanted to be detached of this environment, and from the beginning they said, we wanted the house close to the exterior and interiorized. Everything should be to the interior of the plot. So maybe for some of you it's kind of weird to have a house that has no connection to the exterior, but actually this is what happens in some of the houses in the city center of some of the cities in the south of Spain, where you have blank walls and you can see only glimpses of what happens in the interior of these houses. And also the clients were obsessed with this idea of the patio house that is in the city center of Cordoba and other cities in the south of Spain. And these houses, basically, what they have is a disconnection with the exterior, as you can see in the left picture. And all the life, everyday life of the family and relations and ventilation and light is coming from an interior patio that you can see on the right. And also is where the nature grows, where the color appears, and maybe you know some of the houses by Barragán where he puts color inside of the patios, because he was inspiring this colonial Spanish architecture, where everything happens inside, not to the outside. So the project started with a plot where there was a family house, the single family house that you can see up. And the second generation of the family wants to construct their individual house in this plot. So they have to subdivide the plot in two, and this is what we found. This very narrow plot, but the clients wanted to put a very large program with many rooms. They have 3 kids. They were expecting maybe another. They want to have everything. They want everything in a very small, narrow piece. And also they want to have the patio house that you have in the city center. So we have to figure out how to make a strategy that they were happy, we were happy, and it was looking nice, let's say. So what we did? So we did this kind of patio house without a patio. That what we were doing is to concentrate all the qualities of the patio house, that is the ventilation, the visual relations, the light, and the relation to the direct relation to the interior, and we subdivided it into single pieces, one here and one up here. So. But at the same time, we have this condition of detaching the house to the exterior, and we make this blank wall. But for us, it was a very strong move, and we said maybe we have to make a dialogue with the exterior. So we tried to make that with the curvature of the maybe I think you can perceive, no, mostly here. We curve the facade, trying to be gentle with the exterior, and using that curvature in the interior to bring the light to the main corridor of the house. So the border condition was evident in the interior, and at the same time we were detaching, as the clients wanted, their life from the exterior. So when you get close to the house, there's no door, there's no front door. It's very difficult to know. You only have this path, but you don't know where you're going. You see the house. And why? Because we wanted to keep this idea of a secret entrance that is very related to the Arab culture, where privacy must be kept, so maybe not unveiling the private living in the house. So we put the door here. You can see it here. So only when you enter from here, and if you know the house, you know when the door appears. If not, you are in the garden, in the kind of small patio, but you don't know how to enter the house. So once you transgress this entrance, the house is very nice. It's, let's say it's very warm, it's pink, it's very welcome, you're here. So you see even we put very nice finishes with wood. So it's very hard at the beginning, but nice when you get inside. No? And when you turn around, you start to see that the house starts to be diluted with the garden, and you start to have some connections with the patios, and even we tried when you open the blinds, you start to see that the glass and the setbacks of the facade, these foldings, try to blur this differentiation between the interior and the exterior. And actually, when we talk with the clients later, this is what they enjoy the most, because during the summer, it's very hot in Córdoba, so they open these windows, and then the garden and the interior of the house is the same thing. So the kids can play in the garden, enter into the house, go to the other courtyard, so it's kind of very fluid. So it works as we thought. And then we found the staircases that lead us to the first floor. And as I said before, the clients want to have a very large program, so we have to put it somewhere. And we put it into this very chunky, let's say, block, where we put the rooms, the desk, the rooms for the kids in 2 floors. And with that, we allow the ground floor area that we saw before, the living room, very free and open to the garden. So when we go upstairs, we find this corridor that we were showing you before, but this curvature is connecting both floors, the ground floor and the first floor, and brings ventilation to the whole house. So the skylight is not only to bring light to the house, but also it could be open and ventilate the house from there. So as you see here in the section, as I was saying before, you have a block, like a modernist block that takes all the program in a battery of rooms, and then an open ground floor area with the living room to the garden. So when you see from the outside, the building or the house tends to dialogue with the garden in 2 different ways. One way is this piece that is floating from the garden and is diluted or anchored to it, while the other is embedded into the garden as a very enclosed shed. So when we look to the outside, to the house, we can see the 3 typological elements that we are using. On one hand, or on the left-hand side, you can find the modern block with all the program. Then we have the floating modern pavilion, where is the diner, or the dining room. And then we have the rural shed, where is the kitchen, that is anchored to the ground. And then these 3 typologies are converging in this large living room that you saw before in a very diluted way, but you start to see these kind of strange geometries. There is the negotiation between these 3 different typologies.
Okay, this is another house we are working in. Is in Seville, is also in suburbia. Different kind of suburbia, less formalized than the one of El Brillante that Nuria was explaining to you before. It is very much a realm of countryside. The train is coming through here, roads, there is a highway coming through here. So there's a mix of this kind of very entropic landscape, no, in which everything is mixed a bit, and it's very much this diluted condition of suburban areas in everywhere in the world. So in this case, we wanted to keep this idea of segregating a private space of your own, but using more the language of the road, no, thinking probably about these billboards are abandoned in the roads today. That there are structures for communication now rusted and not communicating anything anymore. No? So the house is working in a similar way with a system of panels. So this is the front view of the house where you have these metal panels or rusted and with no idea how you get into the house. No, again, this notion of privacy is very important, and only showing a staircase that is connecting to the terrace. That here is important because the house doesn't have a very large garden, so the terrace is the space for the leisure in the house. Internally, because all the house is surrounded by this envelope, no, of metal panels. Everything is going to happen around 3 different courtyards. There are these 3, and each of these courtyards are not only allowing you to have light and ventilation, but it's also organizing each of the clusters of programs that are happening inside. No? So you have one cluster that is only rooms, one cluster that is the living here, dining here, another cluster that is for the service. And here again, another image of it where you have to find a way to get into the house. No, it's not very obvious. This is, again, this pop vernacular of Dos Hermanas, that is the name of this place, really tacky, you know, and then this small house covering this rusted metal where everything is happening to the inside.
Okay, I think it's the final house. Yeah, this is the final house that we are showing you. This is in a very...
Another one.
Another one?
Yeah.
Ah, you're present. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so another house. Sorry. So it's located in a very different context. It's Cañete de las Torres. There is a village in Córdoba. This small village is very well formed. So its urban fabric is very well, you can identify it very well. And the site is in front of the church, one of the main church of the city. This is la Iglesia de la Asunción. And similar to the other client that I was talking about, because they are from the same family, not close related, but they are from the same family. They are also obsessed with the patio house, with this patio house of Córdoba, that they want to have it. But here, the problem that we found, or the challenge that the client was giving to us, is that he has a very small budget. And he's thinking to build the house through the money comes.
He's an artist.
And he's an artist.
He doesn't have money.
And also there was not a clear definition of the program, because it's a small family. They are expecting that the family will grow. Because he's an artist, he's thinking that maybe the workshop where he works could be bigger or smaller. So we have an definition of the program and a small budget. So how we construct this? So what we did here is more or less when the house is finished. But what we did is this upper floor is what is configured, what is structuring the courtyard that he wanted. And then the ground floor, here is kind of all well drawn, but the idea is that it will be less defined and more open to the garden. We took this idea, well, actually it was not that directly that we took the idea, but we figured out that the same year we were designing this house, we were visiting Sao Paulo with the students from the AA, and we visit Casa do Vidrio by Lina Bobardi, and we found that it's quite similar what we did at the end. That is a upper floor that is defining the courtyard that I think is coming from Lina's background in Italy, and then the ground floor part is elevated by pilotis and negotiating with the nature of Sao Paulo. So the idea is that these main walls will construct the structure of the building. Well, maybe in the plan is better. These first walls will be constructed, and as you can see here, we speculate how maybe some changes could happen, that maybe even it could be extended to the garden, or these multiple options that you have here. So it's also an incremental housing. This was also in Latin America, and we work with the students about this, how the informal housing is not constructed at once, but they constructed through time as money comes. And similarly, the client want to be outside of the credit system. So he needs to see a design that is able to change and a cheaper construction. So we are constructing the basis for the future to be changed and developed by the client, or maybe even... Okay, so this that you saw here is the construction system, that it will be a projection on top of isolation panels, and with the concrete and the insulation panels, where we are achieving is a cheap construction, but at the same time a good insulation for the house, as it is in the same location, Córdoba, that is very cold in the winter, very hot in the summer. Wait, let's wait to the guy for...
So we used the spraying of concrete in Córdoba before, in the curvy wall. It was sprayed as well. So we are repeating it, but in this case with insulation.
With insulation, yeah. Hopefully. Okay, we have the noise behind. And this is a view from the house, from the backyard to the house, and we can see here how the patio is open to the garden, but it still is close to the city street. And only when you see the facade is kind of blank, again imitating these patio houses, only one door opens and we can have some glimpses of what happens inside, but it's actually what the client wanted to have, something very neutral and not dialogue with the street. But something that he really wanted is to have his workshop in the upper area. That is what is well defined from the beginning, and these skylights will bring the light to the interior. And this, the building is in front of the church, as I said before. And this artist is kind of anarchist. So for him was like to put in some horns to the church, like, like having a subversive way of being in the city, let's say, you know, having a presence there. So he was very keen on putting this kind of skylights there. And also we expected, the house is under construction now, we expected that the elevation of the house will take some ideas from what it was the houses there. This is a painter family. Francisco's family is a grandparent uncle who is a painter from this village, and he painted all the old houses, and you can see how is the strong materiality expressed through it. So we expect that even if it's blank, we can get some of these ideas to the finishing of the house.
Okay, so this house is back to suburbia. In this case, we are in Seville again, in Santa Clara. Actually, this is a place that was the first suburban development in Seville. It was developed by US citizens because it was a moment in the 50s where the dictatorship of Franco get to an agreement with the US government to install NATO installations in the south of Spain. So these guys in this area were supposed to be American people living very close to the military airport of Seville. So they developed the first suburban expansion with the typical American houses with a touch of Andalusian taste, you know, like, the porches, the gable roofs, all these things, and they were inhabited by US citizens until the 70s, and then they were mostly sold to, I don't know exactly why, to professors from the university. So we thought, because the regulation said that you have to keep some of the environment, the image of these houses, the porches, the tilted roofs and all that, that it would be a similar project than the Sargent House by Alison and Peter Smithson, where they are going to comply with a very normal, common, ordinary house, but there are a few tweaks, no? Several things are weird, no, that are totally making the point. So we thought that this project would develop in the same way. You have to comply with very severe regulations to porches, to tilted roofs, and then do something that makes it special for the client. The client was also very singular because, in a way, there were a couple of retired professors in microbiology, so they were thinking that they were too old, and probably the house is not for themselves, but is for their children, no? For the daughter that is living in the UK with her family, and the son that is living in the US. So they were obsessed with durability, they were obsessed with also climatic comfort, because they thought that these guys coming from the US and the UK now, coming to Seville, that is very hot, it's going to be horrible. So they wanted to have a very sustainable house. So we thought to have a system of walls, that is what you see here, that are structural walls, but also a kind of climatic system for the house. And in between these walls, different spatial arrangements would happen. The walls in the end are built as 2 layers of refractory brick. Each of these layers is able to absorb the peaks of heat in the house, and they have also 10 centimeters in between with 6 centimeters of insulation. These are the different scenarios that we were working with. So dream house, dream home, the couple together with no kids, happy. The divorcee, the girl gets divorced. So coming with the children to the house, to Seville, back. Then, I don't read very well, but dependence, yeah. It's one family that doesn't get a job and has to come to live with the parents. The parents die, so the 2 families come back to Seville. Anarchy, that is everyone living together, probably during the holidays. There was a lot of material exploration in this house, trying to find a relationship between this system of walls, the material, the brick, the way in which light is working here. And there were also two very important moments in this house. One is the way in which you discover the system of walls from the entrance. That is actually happening here. This is the built house. And you see that there is this kind of displaced or diagonally shifted enfilade in which you are able to see a bit of what is happening in the next space, but you are not disclosing it. At the same time, the different skylights, one here behind, the light coming from here, are giving different temperatures of light. So you are cutting the space with different kind of light, so different warmth in the light. The other very singular moment is the porch, the portico here, that we also explore through different drawings. And this portico is showing a kind of conflict, in the house. A conflict with a client that was very pretentious, actually. He wanted to have a large villa, say, here I am, he said to me once, I want to have a house. Everyone say, oh, look, the house that Evelio built. So wanted to have a large villa, but actually he didn't have the money. And the problem was very small, so it was a kind of very small house. So we decided to have this kind of very strange, like ambiguous scale by making these columns extremely slender. So you didn't know actually if this was a large villa or it was a modest house, And we did it by doing these columns are 20 by 20 and 7.6 meters height. Actually, it is not possible according to Spanish regulations to have 20 by 20, but it is possible if it's prefabricated. So the guys from the constructor decided to do in his depot, they prefabricate these columns and bring them to the side. So this was prefabrication. And then we were able to go around this normative problem and do these super slender elements that are also in combination with opening horizontally. All the ground floor was creating this very strange scale for the building that actually for us was this is coming behind probably, but remind us to how Robert Venturi worked with some of his works. Like the house for her mother, she was very proud. Oh, look, the house that my kid did for me, and then it's very small and domestic, and and the same in some of his early projects. The difference probably between Venturi and us is that he was still using ornamentation, and all these things, while we're using the technical solution, the way in which structurally these columns are working and how we are stretching them as a way to generate this kind of dialogue or confrontation between the representation of the house and the actual performance of the house. Because when you go to the back of the house, you see that it's going back to these tilted roofs are mandatory according to regulations. It's a very small house, very kind of domestic with the front part of it as a protuberance, like added to it in some way. This is the section of it, the portico, double height for the living room with two very small rooms here. The client said that it is easier to sell a house with 2 levels than 1, so it's like a fake second level in order to sell it better. And then actually the house happening in the 1 level with a tilted roof. The portico can be totally open to the outside. It's very nice to sit here. This is Nuria sitting. Can be closed because heat. It's very hot, so in Seville, so it's important to have this shutter. And actually, we like also this image, like you don't see nothing from outside. Again, coming back to redefinition of the suburban life as enclosing, discriminating, segregating a space of your own where nobody knows what you're doing. It was also very important to leave the bricks inside unclad, because it's the climatic system, is how the energy is going to be absorbed by the bricks. So all the peaks of heat are going to be absorbed by this critical mass of the bricks, and also that the client is bringing to us many things, like these doors, those of his previous house, or this one. So we need to find a way to integrate those things, random things, into our design. So we decided to do a design in which the wood frames were embedded into the bricks, so you don't see them, you only see the sheet of wood. No, that is what you see here. This is the staircase, the double height in the living room with the skylight. That is very relevant because each of the skylights is looking to a different orientation, so that's why it's bringing a different light. This central wall that is perforated in a way that you don't have visual connections. So this is too low, this is too high, so it's, let's say, making lighter the wall, but without establishing a connection. Nuria again in the staircase, very transparent. The double height, the two small rooms in the top, very industrial. Also the slabs in concrete, the same strategy thermically to get the house absorbing the heat in the walls, in the slabs. The beam that is allowing us to totally open this. There's a very dramatic effect in the house. And then again, Nuria testing the balcony, and we were scared, because we don't know if it, will break. But you see, she's here, she survived, so this balcony works, and the kids can play around, and the people can step on it.
Actually, nobody wanted to be there. They convinced me, lying to me. So, well, we show our work of the office, and we want to finish just to show you two workshops we did with AA. This was an initiative we did called Politics of Fabrication Laboratory. The idea for us was to work with public space, political action, and as well digital fabrication and traditions of construction in Latin America. So we were looking to some experiments of architects in Latin America, like Eladio Dieste here in Cuba, but also in Mexico. We were looking, Eladio Dieste. Well, Eladio Dieste is here, is in Uruguay. Sorry for the mistake. This is Félix Candela, sorry, in Mexico and Cuba. Yeah. This is Eladio Dieste with the brick constructions in Uruguay, or the wood constructions in the open city in Chile. So the idea was to how the new digital tools can help us to construct and how we can experiment with the material in combination with these digital tools. So we have here some people who participate in these workshops, and the first was in the open city of Ciudad Abierta in Chile. In Ritoque, the place is Ritoque, but it's related to the University of Valparaiso. So the open city is a location close to the sea, surrounded by dunes, and a community of artists, architects constructed their houses in this location. So the idea was to be in combination or related to the nature. They have certain rituals before starting constructing the house. And at the same time, there were artists, so there was a combination of self-built artistic explorations of space and material experimentation. So how it was organized is that a group of students were coming to the visiting school, but actually everybody was involved in the construction and design of these pavilions. So we were part of the construction, also the local tutors or teachers from the school, the residents of the community, and some other people who came with us. So The result was this pavilion that it was in front of the music hall, let's say, or a small hall in this landscape, where the community will have some activities before entering to this hall, where that it was the main hub of this community. Here there is a video that I took there in the site when we were finishing the construction for you to have an idea of where we are talking about. So we were in between the trees, in front of this hall. So here you see how people was talking, some people were working.
Most people talking.
Talking. Here most people were talking. So you can see that this is very light wood construction, covers part of the, in between the trees. Sometimes it's a sitting place. So I can show you now some pictures of how we were constructing, putting the pieces together even during the night. It was winter in Chile. We were painting some of the pieces and coating them for the climate conditions because it could be very humid during the winter. And this is the final image of the construction the night before we finish. And this is how it looked the next morning. So you can use it for different uses. The design was collaborative. Some people came with the design, but we voted, and then we redesigned it, and we worked with the digital tools and see how we can get these pieces cut. So the digital tools were giving us where to sew these pieces and what is the distance or the length of each of these pieces. But at the same time, we have an analog or direct construction of the elements by post-tensile and pre-tensile system. I don't have pictures of everything here, but this was the result. So it can be used to be seated, it could be a roof, you can hang stuff. And actually how we test these structures were with a party at the end of the construction. And you can see some wine bottles hanging from the top of the structure.
In order to understand.
The people who participate knows how art is testing, I think. Then the second workshop is a workshop we did in Havana, in the University of Havana, in the School of Architecture, in the CUJAE. It's a very interesting building because it was constructed when Fidel Castro became dictator of Cuba. And there was an idyllic vision of what it should be education and how the modern movement buildings should be related with the nature of Cuba. But our context was to construct a light construction for the university. Again, people from different places were coming. Artists were also involved. So it was not only architects and students of architecture, also artists. And we took some inspiration from Wilfredo Lam, that is a very famous artist from Cuba, who was working with overlappings and networks within his paintings. And this was the result we have on the right of one of the designs that at the end is what we constructed. The main restriction for this pavilion was the materiality. So when we went to Cuba, there was not enough material to construct one pavilion that we can buy, because in Cuba everything is very controlled. So if you're from outside, you cannot buy everything you want. You have to buy just by little. So we have to bring all the materials in our luggage, in our suitcases. So we thought to construct a very light construction. We bought these materials that you see here in London, and then we brought them to there. And how we work is, we brought also from the EA a projector. So we were designing digitally the pieces of the structure, and we were projecting them onto the wall, like very low technique, by which we were drawing the panels in cloth, and then we were cutting the panels and sewing them all together. As you can see here, everybody was involved here. You cannot see Francisco and I, but we were sewing as well, because there were so many pieces that everybody had to do it. So here there's a video in the moment in which we sew all the pieces. We hang them from the top before starting tensiling them. The students were very excited. So here is that situation when we hang the structure. You see some cables coming down, and we tensile these cables, as you can see here, and this is the final solution, a pavilion that actually they were using it. They were using for our classes. I don't have the picture, but later they sent the picture to us. They were very grateful because there's nothing in Cuba at that moment. Now I think it's changing. And they were very grateful that we were bringing the materials and constructing something for them that they have nothing in the school. And we also tested with a party and projections on top of the cloth. And yeah, so all these 2 workshops are summarized in these books that you can buy today if you want to at the end of the lecture. It's a very cheap book. And it also has the theoretical thoughts behind the workshop. So it was not only the construction, but we were working with about that in the school. So you can read the text that explains all these ideas. And here we want to finish everyone who was involved in the office, especially to Amar Mehta, who was helping us to put this presentation, Stavros, who is here, who was helping us in the 2 workshops we did. So we have the people who was involved in politics of fabrication, and also to all the students. We have these 8 years, because so we took some of the experiments they did in the unit as part of our inspiration in the work we do in the office. So thank you so much.
Maybe Shireen is going to.
Okay, thank you, Nuria and Francisco. We're going to have a Q&A before the end. So does anybody have a question they would want to ask?
I mean, quite nice work. I like the way that you presented kind of like, I mean, you tell us exactly what you do. Is this sort of like idea of formalism that the minute is mixed with certain context, material, it becomes non-formulaic, in that in each time you actually have to start from scratch in a quite nice way. But also, the title of the lecture is New Formalism, as if it sits in a context of other formalisms, and in a way it relates to other formalisms. How can you, I mean, how do you position yourselves? Is it a critique to somebody else, or not really? You don't have to be critical against somebody. I mean, like, how does your formalism, the new, or how is it new with regards to others?
No, it's a very relevant and thoughtful question, and I guess that it's not so new in terms of what it's able to do, but it's new in the way that it's taking back an interest on the formal. And considering that, it's also reviewing some of the drawbacks that formalism had before. You know, like, for instance, I am from Seville, as you know, and I was very shocked by the way in which Aldo Rossi was working in Seville. When he was working in the commission of Corral del Conde, that was the most important communal courtyard house in the city, he decided to turn it down. And he decided that because he thought that typology was an idea. It is not a material construction, it's not even something shared by the people, it's an idea. So these kind of drawbacks, these kind of things are the ones that we are reassessing. Is really form only an idea? For us, it is not. Form is a construction. And things like that. So it's like revisiting, you know, all these conceptions and bringing them to the present and to what becomes relevant for us today. But it's, you know.
Any other questions? Okay, I have a question. So you were just talking about typologies. And I was wondering, when you start a project, do you always start with a certain typology, or do you find yourself sometime having to start with the constraints of the program and the context without having to go back to a certain typology.
Want to take this one? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go for it. I'm happy to respond. No, but I mean, if you look at some of the projects, for instance, the one in Huelva, the first one that we showed, it was so constrained by the presence of the context, by the sports court, the road, the tree. I mean, it's difficult to say that there is no influence of that. To the contrary, it's very much based on that. But normally what happens is that we believe that if you have a formal strategy, a system, something that is with you and is not part of the context, you have more tools to negotiate or to deal with that context. So when you go to the context with nothing in your hands, then you're absorbed by that context and you cannot really respond to it. When you have a tool, then the tool allows you to negotiate, talk, dialogue with the context. So we started with a very narrow building that is a typology, and then it became to be deformed, shifted, dislocated because of whatever was happening around. But we had that typology of a narrow building that was built with structural walls. So with that, we can start the negotiation. So we believe that it's the two ways. On the one hand, it's good to have this formal preconception, but in any way, the formal preconception is always modified, and it's always the way in which you talk with the context.
Yeah, and also coming from the other question, when we develop the design, it has a formal definition. But formal is this idea of it, because we were discussing how to prepare the lecture, and actually there's a part that is expression, but because we are not only designing in terms of the typology in itself, of how the space is organized purely, because some other architects, they use the type, how you define the relation between spaces, between rooms, between things that happen. But for us, it has an expression. So we are bringing this idea that we have at the beginning, we negotiate with the conditions we have, but at the end, it also has an expression. So it's not something that is purely coming from the organization of the space. That's the...
Continuing with that, I mean, in traditional architecture, that expression was coming from ornament, normally. So it was the way in which the system of relations was explained. Like you have an entrance, so you have a big gate with an arch and a balcony on the top. So instead of doing that, we are increasing the expression of form in order to communicate that. So the system of relations is communicated through expression. So we're putting both together. So at least that's what we're working at.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a last question then. In the Nairobi project and in the last residential project you mentioned, Nuria, you mentioned that some parts of the design were flexible and adaptable. Is this something you're going to continue to explore in your practice?
Yes, I think so. Not only in the practice, also in the unit. We use the visits we do to Latin America to learn from how flexible is sometimes the housing there. And it should come also with certain flexibility of the client, but it's a challenge we wanted to embrace. For us, it's something that, especially in Spain, that we have this crisis, that have these circumstances of people with low budget, in definition of what could be the family because of the circumstances of life. So we thought that to confront this situation, I think it's a very interesting thing to explore. So yeah, I think we will continue. Hopefully we have more clients who are open to that. Yeah.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we're going to go to the South Jury Room. There are drinks and we can continue the conversation over there. Thank you, Nuria and Francisco, and thank you for coming.